There are moments in history when the world seems to stop. A breaking news alert flashes across television screens late at night. A hurried text message buzzes through a group chat. A phone rings in a trembling living room. And everywhere among ordinary people, governments, aviation experts, and waiting families, the same question rises, sharp and impossible to answer. How can something just disappear? On the night of March 8, 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 lifted off like countless flights before it. A routine route, a trusted aircraft, an experienced crew. No alarms. No warnings. No farewells. Just another red-eye flight, carrying 239 people toward a destination they would never reach. When MH370 vanished from radar, the modern world, the world of satellites, GPS, internet, and global surveillance, was suddenly exposed as fragile, even helpless. It turned out that even in an age when we track parcels in real time, a massive passenger jet could still be swallowed whole, leaving behind only silence. In the years that followed, MH370 became more than an aviation disaster. It became a modern legend, a riddle that lived at the intersection of science and grief, of data and imagination. It became the echo of ancient mysteries, ghost ships drifting in forgotten seas, expeditions that never returned, questions left hanging in the air like unfinished prayers. Think of it, an ordinary night at a modern airport. Hundreds of people step aboard a machine they believe will safely carry them across the sky. They cannot know they are boarding not just a flight, but the greatest unsolved mystery of the 21st century. This is not only the story of a missing plane. It is the story of human vulnerability, of our faith in technology, and of the unbearable weight of unanswered questions. And now, let us return together to that night in Kuala Lumpur, to the moment where everything began. Chapter 1: The Ordinary Flight. It began as all great tragedies do, not with thunder but with silence. Not with a warning but with routine. On the evening of March 8, 2014, Kuala Lumpur International Airport hummed like any other international hub, the echo of rolling suitcases, the faint smell of disinfectant mingling with jet fuel. The clipped voices of boarding announcements layered over one another until they blurred into a kind of hypnotic background music. Travelers streamed through the terminal, some exhausted from long days, others anxious for new beginnings. Families hugged goodbye, business travelers checked their watches. And among those travelers, 239 souls would board a particular aircraft. A flight number almost meaningless, at first MH370, a red-eye, from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. For many, it was just another flight. They expected cramped seats, airplane food trays, the dull rhythm of takeoff and landing. What they could never expect, what none of us could, was that this flight would become the world's most enduring aviation mystery. The airplane. The aircraft itself, a Boeing 777-200ER, stood at the gate in quiet majesty. To the average passenger, it was simply large rows upon rows of seats, twin engines that could swallow a human being whole. But in the language of aviation, this machine was extraordinary, a workhorse of long-haul routes, renowned for its safety record, a darling of airlines around the world. This wasn't some experimental prototype, some fragile early machine of aviation's infancy. This was the pinnacle of late 20th century engineering, capable of flying halfway around the globe without refueling. A plane so trusted that pilots nicknamed it the 777. Let us pause here. How strange is it, really, that in a world where we track delivery packages to the minute, an entire airplane the size of a skyscraper, filled with hundreds of people, could vanish into nothing? The very fact that it could happen feels like a cruel anachronism. The crew. The captain that night was Zahari Ahmad Shah, a man with decades of flying experience. 60 years old, soft-spoken, meticulous, the kind of man passengers trusted without ever knowing his name. In the cockpit beside him sat First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid, just 27, on one of his final training flights before certification. He was young, eager, part of a new generation of Malaysian aviators. Behind them, the cabin crew prepared the plane for boarding. They straightened uniforms, smiled their professional smiles, and repeated safety rituals drilled into them over years of service. For the passengers, They would be waiters, guardians, and though no one knew it, witnesses to humanity's most unnerving kind of silence. The passengers. A flight like MH370 is never just a journey, it is a collage of human stories. That night, there were business executives from China, families returning home, students eager to begin new semesters abroad, and tourists carrying souvenirs of Malaysia. There were children who would never grow old. There were grandparents who had seen too much of life to imagine it would end in a mystery. There were lovers texting final goodbyes before switching phones to airplane mode. Imagine them, if you will, tired eyes, slouched bodies, but a kind of unspoken trust. They believed in the machine, in the crew, in the invisible infrastructure of air traffic control. They believed, as we all do, that once you step onto a commercial flight, you are cocooned in safety until you arrive. And here, dear reader, I ask you to lean in. Isn't that belief itself a miracle? Every day, thousands of flights take off and land with a precision that borders on the miraculous. But sometimes, just sometimes, the fabric tears. The routine before the storm. At 12:41 a.m. local time, MH370 pushed back from the gate. The engines roared with a low, thunderous hum that vibrated through the cabin floor. Lights flickered briefly as the systems balanced their load. Passengers settled in, pulling blankets around shoulders, adjusting screens, fastening seatbelts. The takeoff roll was uneventful. The runway blurred, the plane lifted, wheels tucked neatly away. Soon, Kuala Lumpur's lights disappeared below, and the passengers were suspended in the comforting anonymity of the night sky. For many, sleep came quickly. The drone of engines can be, oddly enough, a lullaby. In the cockpit, Zahari and Farik performed their duties. Routine checklists. Radio calls. Handoffs between air traffic controllers. The last words exchanged with the ground were almost boring in their normality. Good night, Malaysian 370. And then, nothing. Silence. The transition point came at 1:19 a.m. Just as MH370 left Malaysian airspace and prepared to enter Vietnamese control. Controllers expected the standard check-in. Pilots do it countless times a day. But on this night, silence replaced routine. At first, no one panicked. Radios fail. Pilots forget. Controllers shrugged, tried again. And again. Nothing. A line of static where a voice should have been. We must remember at that precise moment in the cabin, nothing seemed amiss. Passengers were sleeping, scrolling through screens, perhaps sipping from plastic cups of water. They had no idea that the plane carrying them had already slipped into the shadowy borderland between routine and anomaly. The hidden moment. Later investigation would reveal something chilling. Shortly after the final radio call, MH370-370's transponder stopped transmitting. That little box, the machine that announces the plane's identity, altitude, and location, went dark. In an instant, the aircraft became a ghost to civilian radar. Why? That is the question. A mechanical failure? A deliberate switch off? Something else entirely. And here is where the story turns from ordinary to extraordinary, because after that silence, the plane did not simply fall from the sky. No. It kept flying. For hours. unseen, unheard, slipping across the night sky like a phantom. But in Chapter 1, we leave the passengers still blissfully unaware. They dream in their seats. A child turns over in his sleep. A businessman adjusts his tie before nodding off. The crew goes about their service. And the engines hum steadily, as if the laws of physics alone could carry them to Beijing. Reflection. Perhaps what makes MH370 so haunting is precisely this. Its beginning was so painfully ordinary. The boarding passes. The safety announcements. The subtle click of overhead bins closing. These details matter because they remind us that catastrophe does not arrive with a fanfare. It creeps in quietly, hiding itself in routine. And so, as you and I look back on that night, we cannot help but ask, if we had been there, would we have noticed? Would we have felt the shift, the moment the world tilted from safety to strangeness? Or would we too have pulled the blanket higher and drifted into uneasy dreams, trusting the machine to bring us home? Closing beat of Chapter 1. Flight MH370 is remembered as the flight that vanished. But before it became a mystery, it was simply a flight. And in some ways, that is the most terrifying fact of all. Because the ordinary, the routine, the utterly unremarkable, these are the moments when history sometimes chooses to shatter. And so we end our first chapter here, at the moment of silence. At the moment a Boeing 777 filled with lives and stories ceased to exist in the eyes of the world. What happened next belongs to darkness, to speculation, to oceans and mathematics. But for now, hold this image, a plane gliding effortlessly through the night, passengers sleeping, crew working, and somewhere a clock ticking toward the unknown. Chapter 2, The Sky Above. If Chapter 1 was about the ordinary, the boarding passes, the hum of the airport, the whispered goodbyes, then Chapter 2 is about something larger, the world we created in order for flight itself to be ordinary. Because before we can truly understand the shock of MH370-370's disappearance, we must first understand the aura of trust that surrounded modern aviation. A century of defiance. For thousands of years, humanity looked at the sky with longing. The stars were unreachable, the clouds were the realm of gods and angels. To fly was to dream beyond nature's limits. But in the span of a single century, barely a heartbeat in human history, we went from the fragile wood and fabric of the Wright brothers to jetliners so vast they could swallow small villages in their shadow. 100 years. That's all it took. And by the dawn of the 21st century, flight was no longer magic. It was routine. The miracle had become background noise. A Boeing 777 like the one that carried MH370 was less a symbol of wonder than a bus in the sky. Comfortable. Predictable. Safe. Isn't that, in its own way, extraordinary? That we could normalize something as impossible as sustained human flight, something that, if shown to our ancestors, would have been mistaken for sorcery? Malaysia Airlines, a national symbol. To understand MH370, we must also understand its flag carrier, Malaysia Airlines. Founded in the mid-20th century, it became a symbol of national pride. Its logo, the stylized Wow Bulan, a traditional Malaysian kite, was not just branding but heritage. For decades, Malaysia Airlines connected a young nation to the world, flying to Europe, Australia, China, and beyond. By 2014, it was a familiar presence in airports from London to Sydney. Its crews were known for their warmth, its aircraft painted in bold red and blue stripes. Yes, there had been challenges, financial troubles, stiff competition, the rise of budget carriers, but the airline still carried with it the aura of reliability. And for the 227 passengers and 12 crew aboard MH370, stepping onto that aircraft was stepping into a trusted space. The Boeing 777, a machine we believed in. Perhaps the greatest irony of all lies here. The Boeing 777 was considered one of the safest aircraft in the world. First launched in the 1990s, the 777 was a jewel of modern engineering. It could fly nearly 15 hours non-stop, crossing oceans with ease. Its twin Rolls-Royce engines were each larger than the fuselage of a World War II bomber, capable of generating enough thrust to send a small town hurtling into the air. The aircraft was built with redundancies stacked upon redundancies. Multiple electrical systems. Backup hydraulics. Flight computers designed to withstand failures. Aviation experts often spoke of the 777 as near indestructible, a machine so reliable that it was the backbone of fleets worldwide. So when MH370 vanished, it wasn't just a tragedy. It was a betrayal of everything we thought we knew about the limits of human engineering. The illusion of control. Let us pause for a moment. Think about how you feel when you board a flight. The captain's voice over the intercom. The safety demonstration you barely watch. The soft ding of the seatbelt sign switching off. You feel, if not comfortable, at least assured. But here's the truth we seldom say aloud: when we fly, we surrender control. Entirely. You are strapped into a seat inside a pressurized tube hurtling through the stratosphere at 900 kilometers an hour, guided by a handful of strangers in the cockpit and a lattice of invisible signals from the ground. You cannot leave. You cannot alter the course. You must simply trust. And for most of modern aviation, that trust has been rewarded. Planes land safely. Pilots are competent. Technology is reliable. But when MH370 disappeared, that illusion shattered. It forced us to face the truth that trust is not certainty. The air above Asia. Let us widen the lens further still. The skies over Asia in 2014 were among the busiest in the world. Flights streamed out of Kuala Lumpur, Singapore, Bangkok, Beijing. Air routes across the South China Sea glowed on radar screens like highways of light. MH370-370's planned route was standard, northward from Kuala Lumpur, crossing the Gulf of Thailand, clipping the edge of Vietnam's airspace, and then arcing over southern China into Beijing. Flight time, 6 hours. Nothing unusual. Nothing dangerous. But airspace is also politics. It is invisible lines drawn over oceans and nations, monitored by militaries and air traffic controllers who expect order and predictability. When MH370 slipped out of communication, it didn't just vanish into the sea, it vanished into a geopolitical web where every unanswered call carried not just worry, but suspicion. Why the vanishing shocked the world. So why was MH370 different? Why did its disappearance strike such a deep chord across the globe? Because it challenged the very myth of progress. We live in an age where phones track our steps, satellites photograph our houses, and aircraft are supposed to be monitored from takeoff to landing. To lose a jet in 2014 was like losing a skyscraper in the middle of Manhattan. It seemed impossible. And yet it happened. And so the disappearance became more than news. It became a parable. A reminder that our technologies, however mighty, are not infallible. Breaking the fourth wall. And now I'll ask you directly. Do you remember where you were when you first heard about MH370? Did you pause, as so many did, and think, surely they'll find it within hours? A day. Two days at most. Did you imagine like a story unfolding in real time, that the plane would be spotted, that survivors would be rescued, that closure was only a matter of logistics? If you did, you were not alone. The world expected answers. But instead, hours turned into days, and days into years. And the more we searched, the less we seemed to know. The foreshadowing of shadows. In the calm before the storm, before the investigations and the oceanic searches, we must hold on to this irony. MH370 was supposed to be the safest of the safe. A trusted airline. A trusted plane. A trusted system of skies. And yet, trust is only trust. It is not truth. By the end of this chapter, one thing becomes clear. When MH370 vanished, it wasn't just a plane that was lost. It was a piece of the world's confidence. A hole torn in the narrative of unstoppable human progress. And from that hole would pour theories, searches, grief, politics, and shadows that we will follow in the chapters ahead. Closing beat of Chapter 2. Before we chase the mystery into the darkness, we must remember MH370 began in the light of routine. It was born of an aviation world we believed was invincible. The Boeing 777 was our symbol of triumph, Malaysia Airlines our symbol of connection, the sky itself our conquered frontier. But that belief, that illusion, was about to shatter. And so, Chapter 3 will take us to the moment of fracture, the vanishing point itself, when silence spread across the radar screens and an ordinary night became the world's most haunting riddle. Chapter 3, The Vanishing Point. It is one thing for a flight to begin. It is another for it to end. But it is perhaps most haunting when a flight seems to dissolve into nothing, suspended between beginning and end, cut forever in the space where radar screens go dark. That is where Flight MH370 lives, at the vanishing point. The last words. At 1:19 a.m. March 8, 2014, the voice of Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah filled the radio one final time. Good night, Malaysian 370. Calm. Routine. A farewell as ordinary as a cashier saying, "Have a nice day." No sign of distress. No coded message. Just a professional phrase, spoken countless times a day across the skies. Air traffic control in Kuala Lumpur expected the next call to come when the plane checked in with Vietnam's Ho Chi Minh control. But it never came. And in that pause, barely noticeable at first, the world shifted. The silence that grew. At first, controllers assumed human error. Pilots forget. Radios crackle. Signals fade. A few minutes of silence was not unheard of. But minutes stretched into more minutes. Controllers called again. Static. They called once more. Nothing. Somewhere in the darkened cabin, passengers slept under thin airline blankets, never realizing the invisible thread that tethered them to the ground had already snapped. And here I must ask you, reader, can you imagine being up there, 35,000 feet above the earth, cocoon in a belief of safety, while on the ground the world is calling into silence? The vanishing transponder. It was not just radio silence. The aircraft's transponder, the electronic heartbeat that announces a plane's position, altitude, and identity, had gone dark. Civilian radar lost MH370 entirely. One moment it was there, a blip moving steadily northeast across the Gulf of Thailand. The next it was gone. In a world obsessed with surveillance, this was unthinkable. Planes do not simply vanish from radar. They may crash, they may descend, but their transponders do not usually all go quiet at once. To investigators later, this was the chilling clue. Someone, or something, had deliberately silenced MH370. Ghosts in the military sky. But here lies the twist. The plane had not vanished completely. Civilian radar was blind, but military radar across the region still caught glimpses of a phantom. Hours later, analysts piecing together data saw the impossible. After disappearing from civilian systems, MH370 had turned west. Not toward Beijing, but back across the Malaysian peninsula. It flew over land again, unseen by those asleep below, crossing silently into the Andaman Sea. It was as though the plane had slipped into a shadow world, visible only in fragments, like a ghost. In the cabin. We do not know what the passengers felt in those moments. Did they notice the shift in course? Did the cabin crew reassure them with the same professional calm as always? The truth is, silence covers them too. We have no recordings, no messages, no final text slipping out before the plane vanished from civilian skies. All we have is the absence of words, a silence as vast as the ocean that would later swallow the wreckage. The clock ticks. Time matters in aviation. Every minute without contact grows heavier. By 2:00 a.m. Vietnamese controllers expected MH370 to appear in their sky. It did not. They called. Nothing. By 2:30, confusion began to set in. By 3:00, unease. It would take even longer for alarms to rise, bureaucracy and hesitation delaying the inevitable recognition. This plane was not just late. It was gone. Imagine in those hours, the families at home. Some were sleeping peacefully, unaware. Others were still awake, expecting texts from loved ones after landing in Beijing. Phones were silent, but silence at that hour was not unusual. How could they know that silence had already become eternal? A world that doesn't want to believe. Here's the unsettling part. When planes go missing, disbelief is the first reaction. They'll find it. It's a radar glitch. Communications will come back. And for a while, officials clung to that disbelief. Search and rescue was not yet launched. Announcements were not yet made. It was as though by refusing to say the words, they could hold back the truth. But truth does not wait for permission. The break in the illusion. By dawn, Kuala Lumpur International Airport was filled with anxious families. The arrivals board still showed MH370 as on time. Families stood with flowers, with cameras, with expectation. Minutes passed, then hours. The board flicked to delayed. Whispers began. Questions sharpened. And then finally the truth: the plane had not arrived. It had not landed anywhere. It had disappeared. In that moment, the illusion of certainty, the illusion that we always know where planes are, that air travel is unshakably safe, collapsed. Breaking the fourth wall. And now I turn to you. How do you lose something that large? A Boeing 777 is as long as a football field, as tall as a 5-story building, weighing hundreds of tons. How can something so massive, carrying so many lives, simply vanish? It is a question so absurd it borders on the mythic. Planes are not supposed to become legends. They are supposed to land. The vanishing point defined. So here, at last, we name the moment, the vanishing point. It is the moment when MH370 crossed the invisible threshold between certainty and speculation, between routine and nightmare. The moment when time split in two. In one world, families expected loved ones to arrive in Beijing. In the other, the loved ones had already slipped beyond reach. At 1:19 a.m. With those final words, "Good night, Malaysian 370." The plane passed into history's shadow. Closing beat, Chapter 3. And so, the night held its breath. The plane kept flying, but not toward its destination. The world below slept, unaware. And in the hours that followed, silence deepened into dread. In the next chapter, we will enter the confusion of the early hours, the frantic calls, the missed chances, the first searches. Chapter 4. The first search will carry us into the chaos of the world's response to a disappearance no one thought possible. Chapter 4. The first search. Morning broke over the South China Sea with the same indifference as always. The sun rose on fishermen steering wooden boats through calm waters, on tankers plowing steady lines toward their ports, on island villages beginning another day of work and prayer. The world below had no idea that, somewhere above them in the hours before dawn, a machine the size of a cathedral had simply disappeared. At first, the disappearance was treated with restraint. Aviation is filled with glitches after all. Radios fail, transponders blink out, controllers miscommunicate. Sometimes, planes simply lose contact, and then return a few minutes later, sheepish but intact. The earliest announcement spoke of communication difficulties. There was no talk yet of catastrophe. But by mid-morning, the patience wore thin. Malaysia Airlines had to say what no airline ever wants to admit: Flight MH370 was missing. The words felt impossible even as they were spoken. Missing. Not delayed. Not diverted. Missing. Families at Beijing Capital International Airport, who had been waiting through the night, erupted into confusion. Some clutched signs, others held flowers. They had expected reunions. Now officials in crisp uniforms told them nothing more than that contact had been lost. Journalists pushed microphones forward, cameras clicked, voices rose in Mandarin, Cantonese, English. It was chaos wrapped in disbelief. Back in Kuala Lumpur, the mood was no less frantic. The Malaysian government convened emergency meetings. Military officials reviewed radar logs. Ministers spoke in measured tones before cameras, assuring the world that every effort was being made. Yet behind closed doors, panic seeped through. The unthinkable had happened on their watch, a modern jetliner gone without trace. Search and rescue began almost immediately, but it was like looking for a pebble in a desert. Ships were dispatched to the Gulf of Thailand. Helicopters skimmed low over the waves. Neighboring countries were asked for assistance. Vietnam, China, Singapore all responded, their vessels and planes combing the waters. The sea, however, offered nothing but silence. And the sea is vast. That phrase is too simple, too small. Vastness in this case means thousands upon thousands of square kilometers of rolling water, each wave erasing the memory of the last. A white speck from above might be foam, might be a fishing boat, might be wreckage, or nothing at all. Hours of searching yielded no debris. Not a seat cushion. Not a piece of fuselage. Not a life raft. For the families, time slowed into torment. In Beijing, relatives were herded into hotels guarded by police, fed sparse information. Some wept openly, others shouted accusations, others sat in stunned silence. In Kuala Lumpur, next of kin gathered in airport lounges staring at television screens that repeated the same headlines without progress. The agony of waiting is its own form of violence. The mind conjures images darker than any truth. And yet, even as the world searched, uncertainty lingered. Early reports contradicted one another. Some said the plane had turned back. Others denied it. Some spoke of oil slicks found in the water, but tests revealed they were from ships, not aircraft. Every clue seemed to dissolve as quickly as it appeared, leaving only frustration. The first days of the search revealed another uncomfortable truth. International cooperation is never as seamless as it looks on paper. Nations guarded their radar data like secrets of state. Militaries hesitated to admit what their sensors had or had not seen. Pride, suspicion, and protocol slowed the work of finding 239 souls lost at sea. And over everything hung a deeper question: what if the plane was not in the South China Sea at all? What if they were searching the wrong waters? The possibility was almost too terrifying to consider. To admit it would mean admitting that the machine had flown on, that its silence had carried it further than anyone first imagined. But in those first frantic days, hope still lingered. Hope that survivors might be found floating in life vests. Hope that the plane had landed somewhere remote. Hope that a miracle awaited just beyond the horizon. Hope, cruel and stubborn, that refuses to die until the last possibility has been extinguished. And so ships steamed back and forth, planes traced endless grids over open water, and families prayed in hotel ballrooms under fluorescent lights. The world searched, and the world waited. And in that waiting, a dreadful realization began to settle. The ocean does not give up its secrets easily. For as long as humans have sailed, the sea has been a keeper of mysteries. Ships vanish, storms consume, wreckage sinks. But in the age of satellites and instant communication, we had convinced ourselves those days were over. MH370 was proof that they were not. What do you do when the most advanced technology cannot tell you where to look? When every satellite pass reveals nothing, when every radar screen shows only blank air? You keep searching. You widen the circle. You spend billions. And you hope against hope that the sea, in its own time, will surrender what it has taken. But in those early days of March 2014, the sea did not speak. Chapter 5: The Ocean's Silence. The ocean does not care for human grief. It is older than our maps, deeper than our memory, and wider than our imagination. It has swallowed empires, devoured fleets, and hidden its secrets beneath a shifting surface of blue that looks deceptively calm from above. To understand why MH370 has never been found, we must first understand the silence of the ocean itself. The Indian Ocean, where investigators would later trace the flight's final path, is the third largest in the world, searching across more than 70 million square kilometers. It is a desert of water, a vast and indifferent wilderness. To stand on its shore is to gaze at a horizon with no end. To search it from the air is to look down on endless ripples, where one wave looks like another, where the human eye struggles to catch the smallest fragment of difference. Depth compounds the challenge. Some parts of the Indian Ocean plunge more than 7 kilometers down, deeper than Mount Everest is tall. The floor is not smooth but scarred, with trenches, ridges, and mountains hidden beneath the waves. To drop a plane into such a place is to lose it, not just from sight, but from reach. Even with sonar and submersibles, the sea keeps much of its body hidden, as if mocking human arrogance. Consider this. When Air France Flight 447 fell into the Atlantic in 2009, it took 2 full years to locate its black boxes. And that was in the Atlantic, near heavily trafficked air routes, with debris fields that eventually floated to the surface. For MH370, there was no clear debris field in those first weeks. No flares of floating wreckage. Only an ocean that seemed determined to erase every trace. The families asked the obvious question: how can a modern aircraft, equipped with transponders, satellite links, and emergency beacons, simply vanish into water? The painful answer was that all those systems rely on power, and when power fails or is cut, they fall silent. Emergency locator transmitters are designed to activate on impact, but if the aircraft hit the water in the wrong way, if it broke in certain patterns, those signals might never have been triggered. Even technology bows before the physics of catastrophe. For centuries, sailors spoke of the ocean with reverence and fear. They told stories of ghost ships, like the Mary Celeste, found adrift with no crew, no answers. They charted places where vessels had vanished without explanation, naming them with dread. In some ways, MH370 joined this lineage, not just a tragedy of aviation, but another chapter in humanity's long struggle with the sea. The silence of the ocean is not only physical but psychological. It creates a vacuum that human imagination rushes to fill. In the absence of wreckage, theories grow like vines. Was it hijacking? Sabotage? A fire? A government plot? With nothing tangible to hold on to, people invent answers to soothe the wound of uncertainty. The ocean's refusal to speak drives us into the restless world of speculation. And yet, even silence leaves traces. The sea does not give quickly, but sometimes it gives slowly. A piece of wing washed onto a distant shore. A fragment of interior paneling carried by currents thousands of kilometers. Years later, beaches on Reunion Island, Madagascar, and Mozambique would reveal these small, battered offerings. Each one was a confirmation the plane had ended in the ocean. But they were crumbs, not the loaf. They told us nothing of why or how. The Indian Ocean is not only vast but hostile to searchers. Storms sweep across without warning. Waves tower higher than houses. Submersibles strain against pressure. To map even a fraction of its sea floor requires technology that is expensive, fragile, and slow. Billions of dollars would be spent scouring the water, sending ships back and forth in meticulous patterns. And still, the silence remained. There is a cruel poetry in this. Humanity, so proud of its progress, of its satellites and sensors, of its ability to predict weather and map genomes, is humbled by the same force that humbled sailors centuries ago. The sea has always been our mirror, showing us both our ambition and our limits. MH370 became its latest reflection. And here I must turn to you. Have you ever stood by the ocean at night listening to the sound of waves? There is something in that rhythm, reassuring, eternal, but also ominous. The sea speaks in whispers we cannot quite translate. Imagine then searching for a single aircraft in that vastness. Imagine straining your eyes from the cockpit of a search plane, staring down for hours, knowing that, if debris is there, it might be the size of your palm. Imagine dropping sonar into the deep, tracing echoes that may or may not be twisted metal. Imagine that silence, and the futility that comes with it. By the end of March 2014, it was becoming clear that the South China Sea was not the graveyard. Data from satellites hinted at another path, a darker one, southward into the emptiness of the Indian Ocean. The search area shifted. Ships moved. Families braced themselves for another wave of uncertainty. The silence grew heavier. And still, the ocean gave nothing. The story of MH370 is, in many ways, the story of humanity's confrontation with the last wilderness. We can map the stars, we can split the atom, we can reach into the microscopic fabric of life, but the sea, that ancient expanse, still keeps its secrets. And within its silence lies the answer to a question that has haunted the world since 2014. What happened to Flight MH370? Chapter 6. The theories begin. When the ocean stays silent, the human mind begins to shout. It cannot bear the emptiness of not knowing. And so, in the weeks after MH370 vanished, theories began to blossom: wild, desperate, logical, fantastical. They spread in newspapers, in living rooms, in hushed conversations in hotel ballrooms where families waited. They spread online, where imagination has no ceiling. With every hour that passed without wreckage, the possibilities grew stranger, and yet each carried the fragile weight of hope or the sharp sting of fear. The first and most obvious theory was mechanical failure. Planes have fallen from the sky before, undone by engines, by fire, by sudden depressurization. Perhaps the 777 had suffered a catastrophic breakdown that knocked out communications. Perhaps the crew and passengers had been overcome by smoke, unconscious as the plane flew on until fuel ran out. To many, this was a comforting thought, a tragedy, yes, but an accident, not something darker. But then came the radar evidence, the revelation that the plane had turned west, flown back across Malaysia, crossed into the Andaman Sea. Mechanical failure does not explain deliberate turns. Fires do not chart careful paths. A crippled plane does not navigate for hours, as if guided by an invisible hand. And so the accident theory began to falter. If not accident, then intention. Hijacking was the next theory. It seemed plausible at first. Commercial aircraft had been hijacked before, most famously on September 11, 2001. Could MH370 have been seized, forced to fly to some secret airfield? Some speculated it had landed in Central Asia, hidden in a desert, its passengers held hostage. Others imagined it refueled and continued onward to an unknown fate. For a brief moment, the idea of survival flickered. Perhaps the passengers were still alive somewhere. Perhaps a ransom demand would come. But days stretched into weeks, and no message arrived. No group claimed responsibility. No demands were made. Attention then turned inward, toward the cockpit. Could one of the pilots have chosen to disappear the plane? Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, the veteran with decades of experience, became the focus of intense scrutiny. Investigators learned of a flight simulator in his home where he had practiced long routes over the Indian Ocean. Was it preparation or coincidence? Rumors bloomed: depression, hidden motives, secret struggles. Yet friends and colleagues described him as kind, steady, devoted to his craft. Farik Abdul Hamid, the first officer, was young, inexperienced, on one of his final training flights. Could he have staged something so complex? Unlikely, said most. But suspicion, once seated, never dies easily. There were other, stranger theories. Some said the plane had been shot down, accidentally or deliberately, by a military power unwilling to admit the truth. Others claimed it had been captured, stolen for use in some future terrorist plot. In the echo chambers of the internet, speculation went further still. Alien abductions, wormholes, conspiracies that stretched into the absurd. These theories thrived not because they were likely, but because the silence of the ocean made anything feel possible. Governments, too, were caught in the swirl of theories. Malaysia was accused of withholding information, of moving too slowly, of confusion that bordered on incompetence. China pressed for answers, with 2/3 of the passengers its own citizens. The United States and Australia lent technical expertise, but suspicions simmered everywhere. When a mystery touches multiple nations, it becomes not only a human tragedy but a geopolitical storm. The most haunting theory, and the one that lingered longest, was that MH370 had become a ghost flight. That something fire, depressurization, loss of oxygen had rendered everyone aboard unconscious, leaving the plane to fly on autopilot until its fuel ran dry. It would have drifted southward across empty ocean until finally descending into the sea. No struggle. No choice. Just sleep that became death. And yet, even this theory did not soothe. Because if true, it still left questions. What had caused the initial turn? Why had communication systems been shut down? How had a plane so closely monitored escaped so completely? Each theory, no matter how carefully built, cracked under the weight of one detail or another. Theories are not answers. They are scaffolding built over a void. And the void beneath MH370 was immense. Every new explanation revealed less about the truth and more about our own need to explain, to control, to tame uncertainty with narrative. Perhaps this is what haunts us most. Not just that a plane disappeared, but that in the age of data and surveillance, we cannot agree on why. We are left to wander a maze of possibilities, each path ending in shadows. The truth may be simple, or it may be something stranger than all our guesses. But until the ocean yields its secret, the theories will never stop. The silence of the sea creates noise on land. And MH370-370's disappearance became not only an investigation, but a story told 1,000 different ways, each theory a mirror reflecting our fears. Chapter 7. Inmarsat's Whisper. For weeks, the search seemed blind. Ships and planes combed the South China Sea, the Andaman Sea, even stretches of land, looking for a sign, a seat cushion, an oil slick, anything to confirm where MH370 had gone. But the ocean stayed mute. Hope thinned into desperation. And then, out of that silence came a whisper. A whisper not from wreckage, nor from eyewitnesses, but from the sky itself, from a lonely satellite orbiting far above the Earth. The company was Inmarsat, a British satellite communications firm. Its satellites were not designed to track aircraft in real time. They were meant for data bursts, for handshakes with equipment, background noise, and the machinery of modern aviation. But sometimes background noise hides revelations. When MH370-370's transponder went dark, when its radios fell silent, another system was still awake. The plane's satellite data unit, quietly pinging into space, reached out again and again, like a heartbeat echoing in the void. No voices, no coordinates, just pings, automatic handshakes that said, "I am here, I am alive." For days, no one thought much of these pings. They were faint, technical, meaningless, without context. But as the search failed, investigators turned back to them, desperate for any thread to follow. What they found reshaped the entire story. Each ping carried with it not just existence, but distance. Like an echo in a canyon, the time it took the signal to travel revealed how far the plane was from the satellite. Not a precise location, but a ring, a curved band sweeping across the Earth's surface. With each ping, MH370 was traced along these invisible rings. And there were many. The last came at 8:19 a.m. Nearly 7 hours after takeoff, when most of the world assumed the plane was already gone. 7 hours. Think of that. While families waited in Beijing, while headlines screamed, "Missing," the plane was still in the air, slicing across the sky, unseen. The whisper from space proved what no radar could. MH370 had not fallen early, had not exploded above the South China Sea. It had flown on, into the night, into morning, across distances so vast it defied comprehension. But distance alone is not direction. For that, investigators needed genius. Inmarsat engineers studied the subtle frequency shifts in the pings, tiny changes caused by the movement of the aircraft relative to the satellite, like listening for the change in pitch of a passing train whistle. From those shifts, they could infer whether the plane had turned north or south. The data was brutal in its clarity. The northern path would have carried the aircraft over Central Asia, through militarized skies watched by multiple nations. No trace appeared there, which left only the southern path, deep into the Indian Ocean, a wilderness of water where no one would see, no one would hear, and no one could survive. It was an astonishing act of deduction, almost poetic. With nothing more than faint signals and mathematics, human beings had drawn a line into the void. They could not say why the plane had gone there, nor what had happened inside the cabin. But they could say with chilling certainty that its journey had ended somewhere in the empty south. When Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak stood before cameras on March 24, 2014, he read the words that would crush hope. Based on new analysis, we have to conclude that Flight MH370 ended in the southern Indian Ocean. There were no survivors. No hidden airstrip. No desert landing. Only ocean. In Beijing, families screamed in rage. Some fainted. Others tore at official statements, calling them lies. How could they accept that a conclusion had been reached without wreckage, without bodies, without proof they could touch? In Kuala Lumpur, grief curdled into anger, accusations of incompetence, cover-up, betrayal. Around the world, the announcement landed like a blow. Not only were the passengers gone, but they were gone in a place where retrieval might never be possible. And here, dear readers, the haunting irony. In an age when satellites can photograph license plates from orbit, when GPS can guide us to the doorstep of a stranger's house, it was not vision that solved the path of MH370. It was mathematics. Pure abstract numbers. Humanity's capacity to find pattern in the invisible. Yet numbers could only point to emptiness. They could not raise wreckage from the seafloor, nor bring closure to families waiting by silent phones. They could only whisper, "Here. Somewhere here." The Indian Ocean became not just a search zone, but a symbol, the edge of human knowledge, the place where technology met its limits. Ships and submersibles would soon crisscross its waves, billions spent, sonar maps drawn. But for now, all the world had was a whisper from space, telling us that MH370-370's final journey had been long, lonely, and southward, into the deepest silence on Earth. Chapter 8: The Indian Ocean. To say the Indian Ocean is vast is like saying the universe is large. The words are too small, too tame to capture the truth. It stretches across nearly 70 million square kilometers, an endless canvas of blue that shifts with wind and storm. For centuries, it has been both a highway and a graveyard, carrying traders and conquerors, swallowing ships and sailors without warning. It is a place that humbles even the most confident of human endeavors. And it is here, in this wilderness of water, that the story of MH370 ends. When the Inmarsat data pointed south, the search moved into territory so remote that even mariners rarely ventured there. The southern Indian Ocean is a lonely place. Shipping lanes avoid it, hugging the coasts of Africa, India, and Australia instead. Few aircraft cross it. It is one of the least observed regions on Earth, a blank space on the map of human activity. To vanish there is to vanish almost absolutely. The ocean here is not calm. It is restless, its surface stirred by the roaring 40s. Winds that circle the globe between the 40th and 50th parallels. These winds drive waves as tall as houses, storms that rise from nothing, seas that can batter steel ships as if they were toys. To launch a search here is to pit human fragility against elemental fury. Depth makes the challenge worse. In some places, the Indian Ocean plunges nearly 7 kilometers down, its floor a jagged landscape of ridges, trenches, and volcanic peaks. Sonar can map it, but only slowly, painstakingly, ship by ship. The searchers who came to find MH370 soon realized they were not only looking for a plane, they were mapping a part of the planet humanity had barely touched. There is a cruel symmetry in this. For centuries, explorers braved these waters, their names carved into history: Vasco da Gama, Zheng He, James Cook. They sought spices, trade, empire. They sailed with maps that left half the world blank, filling the margins with sea monsters and warnings. Now, in the 20th century, modern ships returned with satellites and sonar, yet they too found blankness. The sea remains what it has always been, unknowable in its entirety. Search vessels traced slow, deliberate paths across the waves, towing sonar equipment that scanned the seafloor. Crews stared at screens filled with grainy outlines, a ridge here, a trench there. Sometimes shapes appeared that sparked hope, a possible wreckage, a metallic echo. But each time the hope dissolved. The shapes were natural, the echoes geological. The ocean was full of false promises. Meanwhile, families waited thousands of kilometers away, watching press conferences where officials pointed to maps with shifting boxes drawn in red. Today's box might cover 60,000 square kilometers. Tomorrow's would move slightly east or west. The scale was incomprehensible, the precision always uncertain. To many, it felt like searching for a single coin dropped somewhere in Europe, using only a flashlight that revealed a few square meters at a time. The effort was colossal. Australia led much of it, its search vessels spending months at sea. China dispatched fleets, scouring both surface and depths. Private companies contributed their technology. Billions of dollars were poured into the attempt. And still silence. No fuselage. No engines. No black boxes. Nothing to break the monotony of sonar waves echoing back emptiness. The Indian Ocean is not just water, it is time. Currents sweep debris in slow, meandering journeys that can take months, even years, to complete. A fragment that fell into the sea in 2014 might not reach shore until 2016, carried across thousands of kilometers by the Indian Ocean gyre. This is why, when fragments of MH370 eventually washed ashore on Reunion Island and Madagascar, they came not in days but in years, like belated whispers from the deep. And here is where the Indian Ocean plays its cruelest trick. Even when it gives, it does so sparingly. A piece of wing, a panel, a suitcase enough to confirm the loss, but not enough to explain it. It feeds us crumbs while guarding the feast of truth at its dark heart. Think of other mysteries swallowed by the sea. The USS Cyclops, an American naval ship, vanished in 1918 with 306 men aboard, never found. The SS Waratah, an Australian passenger liner, disappeared off the coast of South Africa in 1909. The ocean has always been capable of erasing even giants. MH370 is part of this lineage, a modern echo of an ancient pattern. But here is the difference. MH370 vanished in an era when we believed we had conquered the sea. Satellites circled above, GPS tracked our every step, sonar mapped the deep. And yet the Indian Ocean reminded us that there are still frontiers beyond mastery. Its silence was not only physical but existential. It forced us to admit the limits of our knowledge. To stand on the shore of Western Australia, looking westward into that emptiness, is to feel what the families of MH370 felt, a horizon with no answers. Somewhere out there, beneath thousands of meters of water, lies the wreckage of a plane, and within it the voices of 239 souls silenced forever. But the ocean keeps them, and the ocean does not bargain. And so the search dragged on, month after month, year after year, with ships tracing grids across an ocean that mocked their patience. The Indian Ocean remained what it has always been, a graveyard that does not give up its dead easily. Chapter 9. The Family's Vigil. While ships traced grids across the Indian Ocean, while satellites whispered faint mathematics from orbit, the families of those aboard MH370 lived in a different kind of ocean, one made of waiting, of silence, of grief without end. If the sea is vast and merciless, so too is the emptiness of a missing loved one. In Beijing, relatives of the Chinese passengers were housed in hotels, monitored by officials, updated through carefully managed press briefings. The rooms became a strange purgatory, curtains drawn, televisions flickering with news that never changed, the air thick with the smell of instant noodles and cigarette smoke. Mothers clutched photographs. Fathers barked at reporters. Children asked questions no one could answer. Every knock on the door, every buzz of a phone sparked hope that quickly dissolved into nothing. Some relatives refused to leave the airport in those first days. They stood beneath the cold glow of the arrivals board, staring at the word delayed. Long after they knew it was a lie. They carried flowers, expecting reunion, refusing to surrender to despair. To admit the truth felt like betrayal. In Kuala Lumpur, families gathered in lounges and hotels too, their faces lined with exhaustion. The airline offered counseling, food, places to rest, but what they wanted was certainty, and certainty never came. Press conferences became ritual. Officials stood behind podiums repeating phrases that gave the illusion of progress. But progress never touched the heart of the matter. What does grief look like when there is no body? It looks like anger. Protests erupted. Families accused Malaysia Airlines of lies, of cover-ups, of incompetence. Some stormed briefings, shouting over officials' voices. Others held vigils outside embassies, chanting for truth. Their rage was not only for their lost relatives, but for the unbearable fog in which they were forced to mourn. And yet grief is not only loud. It is also silent. In private rooms, parents stared at phones, dialing numbers that still rang. Wives left voicemails that would never be heard. Children opened laptops, scrolling through photos, refusing to believe those smiles were already memories. There is a cruelty in modern technology. The online presence of the missing lingers long after their bodies are gone. Facebook pages, WeChat profiles, WhatsApp messages, digital ghosts that flicker in the half-light of denial. Some clung to hope longer than others. Hope that the plane had landed somewhere remote, its passengers alive, waiting to be found. Rumors of sightings, of signals, of secret airfields, each rumor rekindled a flame that had barely died out. The human mind cannot live on despair alone. It must feed itself with possibility, however thin. And so families swung like pendulums, from rage to hope, from despair to denial, over and over again. The cultural dimensions of grief added another layer. In China, the tradition of filial duty magnified the pain. To lose a child, a parent, a spouse without the ability to bury them was a wound beyond description. Funerals could not be held, prayers could not be completed, closure was denied. In Malaysia, too, rituals of mourning remained suspended, as families waited for bodies that would never return. It was as though time itself had been frozen. Governments struggled to manage this grief. They offered compensation, but money is a poor substitute for certainty. They offered apologies, but apologies do not bring closure. What the families wanted, answers, proof, truth, remained locked beneath the waves. Some turned their grief into activism. They formed groups, demanded transparency, lobbied for improvements in flight tracking. They traveled to Australia, to Malaysia, to any place where officials might listen. They carried banners with the names of their loved ones, refusing to let the world forget. For them, to give up was to let their relatives vanish twice, once into the ocean and once into memory. And yet, outside the families, the world began to move on. Other headlines filled newspapers. Other tragedies captured attention. The mystery of MH370 became a documentary, a news special, a late-night conversation. But for those left behind, it was not a story. It was a wound that never healed. Every birthday, every holiday, every empty chair at dinner was another reminder. Reader, pause here for a moment. Imagine a phone on your nightstand. Imagine it's still filled with text messages from someone who should have come home but never did. Imagine scrolling through them in the quiet hours, the green and blue bubbles of conversations that now end in silence. That is the vigil these families still keep. The vigil was not just days or weeks. It stretched into months, then years. And even as fragments began to wash ashore on distant beaches, fragments that proved the plane had indeed met the sea, the vigil continued. For a fragment is not a body, not a face, not an embrace. It answers one question but leaves 1,000 unanswered. In the end, the families of MH370 were left to mourn without closure, to live in a world where absence itself became the only presence. Their vigil continues still, in photographs taped to walls, in names spoken softly at night, in the empty silence of beds left half slept in. The ocean claimed the passengers, but time claimed the families. Time stretched unbearably thin, turned into waiting without end. The search was for wreckage, but the vigil was for love, and love does not disappear as easily as a plane on a radar screen. Chapter 10. Fragments on Shore. For more than a year after MH370 vanished, the ocean gave nothing. Search ships returned to port with sonar maps of mountains and trenches, but not a single piece of wreckage. Families clung to fading hope, while the world's attention drifted toward other crises. And then, in July 2015, the ocean finally spoke, not with answers, but with fragments. On the island of Réunion, a French territory east of Madagascar, a beachcomber stumbled across a piece of wreckage. It was a flaperon, part of a Boeing 777 S-wing, weathered by salt and waves, encrusted with barnacles. To most people, it was only a piece of twisted metal and composite. But to experts, it was unmistakable. It belonged to MH370. News of the discovery raced around the globe. At last, something tangible. At last, proof that the plane had ended in the Indian Ocean, just as the Inmarsat data had whispered. But the fragment was both a revelation and a torment. It told us where, but not why. It confirmed death, but gave no closure. The flaperon became a symbol. Families touched its photographs with trembling hands, imagining their loved ones' final moments. Investigators studied its fractures, hoping to deduce how the plane had hit the water. Some said the edges showed signs of a controlled descent. Others argued they spoke of a high-speed crash. The debate only deepened the mystery. And then, more fragments began to appear. On the coasts of Mozambique, South Africa, Tanzania, and Madagascar, waves delivered their offerings. A wing flap. An interior panel. Pieces of engine cowling. Suitcase fragments shredded by the sea. Each one was identified, logged, and sent for analysis. Each one proved again what no one wanted to believe: the passengers of MH370 had been carried into the depths. Currents explained the delay. The Indian Ocean's gyres are like slow rivers in water, sweeping debris across thousands of kilometers. A fragment may drift for months before reaching land. The sea does not rush. It moves at its own pace, and grief must follow. The families, already battered by uncertainty, faced a cruel paradox. To find debris was to confirm loss. To confirm loss was to end hope. Some refused to accept it, insisting the fragments were planted or fabricated, part of some vast conspiracy. Others wept, thanking the ocean for finally giving back a trace of the missing. For them, a piece of wing was not just metal, it was the last touch of someone they loved. Investigators tried to piece together meaning from the fragments. They studied barnacles, tracing growth patterns to estimate how long the pieces had floated. They analyzed currents, drawing maps backward to guess where the plane might have struck the water. But the ocean's mathematics are as treacherous as its waves. Each calculation led to probabilities, not certainties. The debris gave confirmation of the end, but no coordinates of the grave. And so the fragments became like messages in bottles, washing ashore one by one. They spoke of catastrophe, but in a language too broken to understand. Each new discovery reopened wounds, each headline rekindled anger. Families demanded to know why the entire plane had not been found, if the ocean could surrender these scraps. Officials responded with maps and models, pointing again to the vastness of the Indian Ocean. But vastness is not comfort. Vastness does not explain absence. There is something haunting in the image of these fragments. A wing washed onto a tropical beach, children playing nearby, unaware of the grief embedded in its battered frame. A suitcase torn open by waves, spilling clothes never worn again. Objects once part of a living journey, now relics scattered across distant shores. They are like ghosts, not of people but of things, remnants that testify to an ending we cannot fully see. And yet the fragments carried a strange, painful gift. They confirmed that MH370 was not a riddle without substance. It was not a story of abduction nor a disappearance into thin air. It was a plane, it was real, it was gone. The ocean had swallowed it, and in time, the ocean had returned small tokens to remind us of that truth. But the fragments were never enough. They gave hints but not answers, closure but not peace. They reminded us that the greatest mysteries are not always solved by grand revelations, but by small, tragic proofs that leave the larger questions intact. The ocean had spoken, but only in whispers. And whispers are not enough to silence grief. Chapter 11: Conspiracies and Shadows. When truth hides, stories take its place. The human mind abhors a vacuum. It cannot live comfortably alongside silence. And so, in the wake of MH370's disappearance, when the ocean gave only fragments, and the official investigations offered only probabilities, conspiracy theories rushed in like a tide. They were wild, they were contradictory, they were often cruel, but they were also inevitable. Some conspiracies began in whispers, in online forums where strangers pieced together scraps of news. Others were amplified by television talk shows, tabloid headlines, even by politicians who saw opportunity in uncertainty. At first, many of these theories seemed harmless, a way for people to cope. But over time, they revealed something deeper about our fear of the unknown and our suspicion of authority. The most persistent suspicion was of governments. Malaysia, already criticized for its handling of the crisis, became the first target. Families accused officials of withholding information, of knowing more than they admitted. Why had it taken hours before the disappearance was acknowledged? Why were military radar sightings not shared immediately? Why did explanations shift from day to day? Each inconsistency, each delay, fed the belief that something was being hidden. China, too, faced whispers. With 2/3 of the passengers Chinese citizens, some speculated Beijing knew more than it revealed, or that MH370 had been the target of an international plot. The United States was accused of intercepting the plane, of shooting it down, of diverting it to the remote base of Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean. Russia and India were drawn in by rumor. Each theory grew branches, twisting further away from evidence into fantasy. And then there were the theories that bordered on science fiction. Some claimed the plane had been hijacked remotely, flown by hackers who seized control of its systems. Others argued it had been kidnapped for its cargo, mysterious electronic equipment, or perhaps passengers carrying sensitive knowledge. Some believed the plane had not crashed at all but had landed in secrecy, hidden in a desert or jungle airstrip. There were even those who suggested it had been taken by forces beyond Earth, swallowed by aliens or lost through a rift in time. To outsiders, such theories seemed absurd. But to families left in limbo, absurdity was not always worse than emptiness. A wild theory at least gave shape to the shapeless, direction to the directionless. To imagine that loved ones were alive somewhere, held captive or hidden, was a less brutal thought than to accept they had vanished into an indifferent sea. The media played its part. In the hunger for ratings, television programs speculated freely. Graphics showed planes landing on remote runways or being shot down by missiles. Reporters spoke of mysterious cargo, secret passengers, geopolitical tensions. For viewers, MH370 became less a tragedy than a riddle to be solved, a story to consume. And when truth is uncertain, entertainment fills the void. But conspiracies have consequences. They deepen wounds. Families clung to false hopes, chasing rumors that would never yield their loved ones. Public trust in officials eroded, leaving scars that linger long after the press conferences ended. The investigation itself was hounded by constant suspicion, every delay interpreted as deception, every correction as proof of lies. There is a darker truth here, too. Conspiracies do not only grow from grief, they grow from our modern world itself. We live in an age of information overload, where truth and falsehood mingle freely. A disappearance like MH370 was not only a tragedy but also a perfect storm, an event dramatic enough to spark global attention, mysterious enough to invite speculation, and prolonged enough to keep imaginations alive for years. It was, in a sense, the perfect conspiracy canvas. Reader, let me ask you, would you rather live with a terrible truth or with an endless question? For many, a dark conspiracy is easier to accept than the idea of randomness, of a machine and hundreds of lives swallowed by chance. Conspiracies offer intention, agency, meaning, even if that meaning is monstrous. The human heart prefers a villain to avoid. And so MH370 exists in two worlds. In one, it is a tragedy, a plane lost to accident or deliberate act, its wreckage hidden beneath the Indian Ocean. In the other, it is a myth, a plane stolen, hidden, erased by powerful hands. Both worlds coexist, feeding one another, because the sea has not given us enough to destroy either. In time, perhaps the wreckage will be found, the black boxes recovered, the final truth written down. But until then, MH370 will always be a story told twice, one in the language of evidence, and the other in the language of shadows. Chapter 12: The Vanishing Legacy. History remembers some tragedies by their scale, others by their lessons. MH370 is remembered by its absence. A plane vanishing without a trace in the 21st century was not merely a disaster, it was an insult to our belief in progress, a wound to the idea that technology has made us masters of the world. The legacy of MH370 is not only the grief of families or the billions spent searching. It is the reminder that certainty is fragile, that even in an age of satellites and constant surveillance, we are still vulnerable to the same mysteries that haunted sailors centuries ago. After the disappearance, the aviation industry vowed reforms. Tracking systems were improved, satellite communication protocols tightened. No plane, they said, should ever vanish again. Yet even these promises carry a shadow. Technology can be upgraded, but the human desire for answers cannot be so easily repaired. Families still wait, still demand, still plead for final proof. Their grief has become generational, carried forward in anniversaries and vigils, in children who grew up without parents, in parents who grew old without closure. But beyond aviation, MH370 has entered the realm of cultural myth. It is mentioned alongside the Bermuda Triangle, the Mary Celeste, Amelia Earhart. It has become shorthand for the unexplainable, invoked whenever something disappears into silence. In that sense, it belongs less to the world of engineering than to the world of story. And perhaps that is its truest legacy, that it revealed the hunger for narrative within us all. Some seek comfort in technical explanations, in probabilities and satellite arcs. Others invent conspiracies, because it is easier to believe in malice than in randomness. But beneath both lies the same need, to turn mystery into meaning. Because to live with pure silence is unbearable. Reader, think back to the last time you flew. The boarding pass in your hand. The smell of jet fuel. The shuffle of passengers down the aisle. Did you think of MH370? Did you glance at the map on the seatback screen, tracing your flight across oceans, and wonder what it would mean if that line simply stopped? If the screen went dark and the silence began, MH370 lies in that thought. It is not just a tragedy of 239 lives, though that alone is enormous. It is also a mirror held up to us, showing the thinness of our certainty, the fragility of our trust in systems too complex to see and too vast to control. The ocean still holds the plane. The black boxes still sleep in darkness, their voices trapped in silence. One day they may be found. One day the mystery may finally be written into history with clarity instead of speculation. But until then, MH370 is a story suspended between fact and myth, grief and imagination. And so we end where we began, an ordinary night, an ordinary flight, a boarding call at Kuala Lumpur. Passengers filed in, crew smiled, engines roared, wheels lifted. The sky accepted them. And then, without fanfare, without witness, without mercy, the plane slipped into shadow. It is not only a story of disappearance. It is a story of us, of how we hope, how we grieve, how we tell stories when the world gives us silence. MH370 remains the vanishing point of the modern age. And perhaps that is why it haunts us still. The story of MH370 is not finished. It may never truly be finished. A plane disappeared, families were left waiting, the world searched, and the ocean stayed silent. What remains is a scar, not only for those who lost loved ones, but for all of us who live in an age where disappearance should be impossible, and yet still is. Perhaps one day, wreckage will be found. Perhaps the black boxes will be lifted from the seafloor, their voices breaking through a decade of silence. Perhaps the final minutes of MH370 will be written down with clarity. But even if that day comes, the legacy of this disappearance will remain. Because MH370 has already become more than a plane, more than a tragedy. It is a reminder of the limits of human knowledge, a symbol of grief suspended in time, and a legend of the modern age. We think of technology as armor against the unknown. But MH370 proves that mystery is not gone from the world it waits in oceans and skies to remind us of our fragility. For the families, the mystery is personal, unbearable. For the world, it is collective, a shared astonishment that something so large, so real, can vanish so completely. And so the story of MH370 ends not with answers, but with a question that lingers like an echo: how can something disappear without a trace? The question is heavier than the plane itself. It carries the weight of human faith in order, in systems, in certainty. And it is a question that reminds us hauntingly that for all our progress, we are still small against the vastness of the sea and the silence of the sky.